so before I talk about the aftermath of our latest Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl character reveals, and before I get into predictions for the rest of the roster and all that stuff, first off, I gotta explain what's going on with this Garfield leak. Possibly this game's equivalent to Smash Ultimate's Grinch leak. Garfield leak, Grinch leak, it kind of works. Alright, so yesterday, PCMRace.com posted an article featuring a supposed image leak for Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, featuring some yet-to-be-announced characters. Most prominently displayed is Garfield. The image is of a character lineup with the fighters T-posing. So this image would be behind-the-scenes type stuff, something the developers would be using to model the fighters. We can, of course, see Garfield's model, but there's also Ren and Stimpy and Aang here for those other unannounced fighters. Over on Reset Era, Pei wrote, I posted a exclusive leak on my website. An anonymous source sent me images that contain Garfield, Ren and Stimpy, and Aang. Along with the previously unannounced characters, he also mentions that Korra and Aang might not be in the game due to licensing issues between GameMill and Avatar Studios, but nothing is set in stone yet. Very odd this Reset Era post claims they were told the rights to Avatar weren't assured, as we've seen some Avatar and Legend of Korra themed stages officially revealed. I feel like since the stages are in, then the characters could be like licensing would be across the board or not at all. And Aang and Korra's silhouettes have been noticed on that initial box art silhouette picture thing. So yeah, I just feel like they probably are in the game, and it's weird that they were told it was unsure. Anyway, this apparent leak, of course, quickly gained a lot of attention. Even the attention of the developers of All-Star Brawl. Over on the official Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl Discord, Rep wrote, this is an interesting template for a leak. Definitely beats the 4chan text-based leaks. But sorry to disappoint, this isn't real. But because this is a high-effort template, I'm going to be giving you guys a peek behind the curtain as to why. Who's ready to see some Unity screenshots? This scene instead is used to test lighting. Characters have different interactions with the environment when the scene is entirely unlit, aka why I picked these 3 for the demonstration. I did some edits to the scene to make this not actually spoil anything. The whole roster is in this lineup scene. So enjoy these 2 shots with the actual backdrop we use. First standard, now flattened. So pretty much immediately after this one appeared, the developers of the game were quick to give us some proof that this leak was actually fake and not a real leak. Even providing proof of lifting the curtain and showing us a behind-the-scenes look of what the actual in-game character model lineup they use looks like. Over on Twitter, Bottles the Mole wrote, while it's good on the devs for telling us what isn't real, spanning across this and that one Codenames text leak, showing us something actually legit in image form might not have been the best idea because now fakers know how to make their fakes look more convincing. Good point. However, Rep also revealed a blank image of the character model background and wrote, and because I love chaos, have fun. So now we can't even trust a fake leak that does have the correct model background. As it's been revealed publicly now, fake leakers gonna make fake leaks, I guess. So, yeah, if you want dev insight on the game, just make an extremely convincing leak, and I'll be forced to make a post as a rebuttal. Over on Twitter, I decided to help spread the developers' word that this one was fake before this Garfield leak fire got out of hand. However, not everyone is convinced by the developer here. Over on Twitter, Dad wrote, the model for Lincoln Loud looks identical. I responded, they didn't try and stop the box art leak. I'm going to believe the developers here. They've been very open about everything, so I don't think it's just damage control. And that's true. The developers have been totally transparent throughout all of this. And that box art silhouette leak, I've never seen them try to deny. And in general, they've just been very open with the fans about their process making this game. So I'm inclined to believe them here, based on, if nothing else, the merit of goodwill they've gained with the fan community so far. But even so, let's take a look at the counter-arguments here anyway. Many people have said the models for Lincoln on the Garfield leak and the model of Lincoln the developers showed off are practically one-to-one, suggesting the Garfield leak might actually be real and made with assets from within the game. Here's both Lincolns next to each other. They do match up very closely. There's maybe a couple minor differences here, but that could be chalked up to one of them being slightly older, a less polished character model perhaps, or just the blurriness of the Garfield leak one. Blurry leaks are a Smash fan's favorites after all. We can also look at other character models on the Garfield leak, such as SpongeBob and Patrick, and see that they do seem at least pretty close to what we've seen of these characters from Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. Not that a fake leaker couldn't create their own models of the characters and base those models off of the images we have of these characters and have them basically match up. We have plenty of images for reference, and I think Smash Bros. Leaks have taught us fake leakers will put a lot of effort into faking leaks. And this game has a lot of the same Smash speculation community looking at it, so the same fakers could be out there making fake leaks for this one now. Probably the most compelling argument that this couldn't be faked is the fact that April and CatDog are on it, and their in-game renders were revealed less than 24 hours before this leak showed up online. So in order to fake matching renders of April and CatDog here, the faker would have to work pretty quickly, as they only had reference material to base these character models on for a little less than a single day. Probably doable to make 2 models in a day, but there'd be some serious effort here if it is indeed fake, like the developers are claiming it is. So there's a bit of a debate right now, and plenty of good arguments from both sides whether this Garfield leak is actually legit and the developers are just doing damage control, or if it is indeed simply a fake and the developers are telling the truth. On Twitter, Chungarant wrote, "If the Ren and Stimpy models turn out to be identical, there may be some actual truth." And I responded, "That will be the definitive test. If this had come out before April and CatDog, it obviously would be much more interesting. Anyway, I'm going to trust the devs on this one being fake. If Ren and Stimpy, Aang, or Garfield get announced and match 1-to-1 with these models, it might be worth looking back at." So that's my stance for now on the Garfield leak. I'm going to trust the developers here, who are saying it's fake. Again, they have been very forthcoming and upfront about everything going on with this game so far, so I think they've earned some trust here. If it does turn out to be damage control, however, they may lose some of the good faith they currently have with the fanbase. If it turns out we were lied to cover up a real leak, that sort of thing can be pretty harmful to a developer's reputation, especially when you have fans, such as myself, spreading the word that the developers are saying it's fake and that we should trust in their word. You don't want to make fools out of your fanbase. So for now, I'm going to believe their word and say it's fake. And even if it is indeed fake, that of course doesn't mean I think these characters can't happen. We can still totally get Garfield, and I honestly think he's actually pretty likely, with or without this leak. I was already speculating about him potentially getting in the game before this anyway. As for Ren and Stimpy and Aang, we basically already know they're going to be in the game because of the box art silhouette leak. If any of these characters get revealed and the models match up with the models on the Garfield leak though, then the developers might have some explaining to do. Again, if this had leaked before we saw April and CatDog and these models still had matched up, we'd have a different story here. Alright, well speaking of April and CatDog, let's move on and talk about the latest character reveals. During the Gamescom Future Game Show, we were promised 2 brand new brawlers would be announced, and we were shown this image of 22 characters with 8 yet to be revealed fighters. We still haven't gotten an official confirmation if the full roster will in fact be 22 characters, but we did get confirmation that there won't be any unlockable fighters or stages. Everything will be available right from the start. If you've ever had to run a Smash tournament and needed multiple copies of the game with everything unlocked, you understand what they mean here. Anyway, most likely if everything will be available from the start, I assume that means they'll reveal all of it before the game is out, which likely means 22 will be the final roster size. Perhaps they don't want to officially state that we'll be getting 22 characters in this roster, because maybe they want to announce there will be DLC, and the roster will be larger eventually. That's just my speculation though. Okay, so Gamescom Future Game Show came and went, and at the end, we did get 2 new fighters revealed, CatDog and April O'Neil. I think they both look fantastic. CatDog has such wacky movements and attacks, they look like they'll be an absolute blast to play as. And seeing April in her classic 80s outfit, more so than the 80s Turtles we've already gotten, really hit me with nostalgia. I was a big fan of the 80s Turtles as a kid, so I'm very happy this game is going all in with the throwback designs. Not everyone was as excited as I was for these reveals though, but hey, you can't please everybody. So let's first talk about CatDog a bit. They have some crazy attacks, including Buff Dog, which I think is such a cool reference to that classic CatDog episode. Their stage was revealed here, and it's their house, which is also such a classic part of CatDog. They really captured the series very well. CatDog was also revealed on National Dog Day. Probably a total coincidence, but hey, maybe we should check what weird, obscure holidays the next character reveals happen to fall on. Alright, so now let's talk about April, because there's a lot to say about this reveal. First off, I think everyone is aware that this wasn't the only thing April recently got announced for. A day earlier, April was announced as a playable character in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Shredder's Revenge game. When that happened, I did see a few people speculating maybe this could bode well for her chances in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. And the official Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl Twitter liked the tweet of April being announced for Shredder's Revenge. Although Game Mill did say, Both of us announcing playable April O'Neil this week, total coincidence. We can't wait to play as her in both games. So I guess all the April O'Neil attention lately is just coincidental. I have seen there's a bit of a controversy with her animations in Shredder's Revenge. A lot of them match up with Street Fighter animations. Whether this is considered plagiarism, I mean it's not an exact tracing of the images, or they simply modeled the moves as references and doing an homage to Street Fighter moves, I don't know. We also got a better look at that banner art image that we saw on the Twitter page with some of the characters. This same artwork is lining up with some of the characters on the box art silhouettes. And of course, the most important thing about April being revealed as far as speculation goes is that we finally know who the final mysterious silhouette box art fighter was. It was April. And we had speculated it might be either April or live-action Dora the Explorer. I was personally on Team Dora, as I didn't think the look of the shoe fit for April's boots. But I guess I was wrong. The shoe fits April. Here's April doing a kick in-game, and it's very similar to that pose on the box art. Leonardo turned out to be who the other mysterious box art character was, so I guess the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle characters just make for odd-looking silhouettes or something. And for anyone out there still thinking maybe the leg belongs to some other fighter, the devs have confirmed the silhouette is in fact April. See, the developers are generally very upfront with the fanbase about this stuff. One odd thing about April is that they used this render of her. However, apparently that's an older version of her portrait, and the most recent render for her actually looks like this, which in my opinion looks much better. So with April revealed, that puts a bit of a damper on the possibility of other Turtle reps, specifically Shredder or Raphael or Donatello. Like we were told, there are no shoo-ins for this game. Just because a confirmed character is here doesn't mean another character will show up as well. We have 3 Turtle stages shown off so far, and there's that whole theory about every fighter having their own home stage. So as of right now, we have a TMNT rep revealed for each TMNT stage that we know of. Speaking of stages, CatDog stage wasn't the only new stage we saw in this reveal trailer. Another Avatar: The Last Airbender stage was revealed based on Omashu from the Earth Kingdom. Lots of cool stuff happening in this stage, including soldiers in the background and the Cabbage Merchant. Because of how different some of the clips we saw looked, I've seen some people suggesting this might be a traveling stage. We also got a better look at the Harmonic Convergence stage. Looks like Rava and Vatu are flying around in the background of that one, maybe battling each other. So this is our 3rd stage we've seen from the Avatar and Legend of Korra franchises. We have the Western Air Temple, the Harmonic Convergence, and now Omashu. Yet we have no Avatar characters revealed officially yet. Korra and Aang seem to be among the remaining unrevealed box art silhouette fighters, but if home stage theory is correct, this could mean we could be getting 3 Avatar series characters. But I'll talk more about that a bit later. One final really interesting thing that was noticed within these reveal trailers themselves was Lincoln Loud in an Ace Savi costume. Now it remains to be seen if this is somehow a part of his moveset, or if this is actually an alt costume for Lincoln, which could confirm the game has legitimate alt costumes and not just alternate colors for different characters or something. We had noticed that Leo's box art render has a slightly different look than his in-game costume, so let's keep our eyes peeled for anything else that might point to more potential alt costumes for these characters. Be really cool if everyone had alts. Okay, so after the reveal of CatDog and April O'Neil, GameMill now has 3 private videos, so most likely the remaining 6 unknown characters will all get revealed in sets of 2 like CatDog and April were. I still have yet to see anywhere officially whether or not 22 is the final roster size, or if there will be DLC for the game, or even if October 5th is the official release date. So I expect that stuff will also be clarified in the coming weeks, possibly some of that announced in future character reveal trailers for the game or something. Over on the official website for the game, CatDog and April have now been added to the character portraits. Oddly enough, Sandy's portrait is still not here. Also, April uses that apparently outdated version of her portrait render for some reason, instead of her updated one. With CatDog and April's portraits added to the site, we can check what their code names are. April is Reporter, and CatDog is Chimera. Alright, so let's get into speculating future characters. To recap what we know about the fighter selection process, Nickelodeon didn't demand any must-haves. No, everything has been pitched to them by us and GameMill. And also, we made a list of requested characters, but they decided on them in the end, even though we pushed ultra hard for months to include Nigel, Lucy, and some others that they kept refusing, until they gave up and let us include them. Their original accepted list was pretty much the most boring and predictable you could expect. So Nickelodeon didn't pick the characters, they didn't choose them, but they did approve of them. And the developers had to push for a few of the character choices they wanted to add. Well, a new interview from Games Radar shed some more light on the character choices process. But when it comes to live action characters, well, don't hold your breath. Not only is Ludosity team relatively unaware of Nickelodeon's spat of live-action shows, they haven't aired in Sweden, says Nystrom, but the team feels like they may not be the right fit. There goes my hopes and dreams of playing as Ariana Grande in another video game. And there's a quote, "I'd assume they don't feature a giant 2-ton hammer suddenly produced from your back pocket," Nystrom says, when asked about including live-action fighters. There's just so much weird and zany stuff to draw from the animated shows, and there is no shortage of amazing characters there. To be fair, whereas Smash Bros. Can easily incorporate existing game characters with a well-known fighting style or weapon, it's a lot harder to pull in 2 live-action stepbrothers into a brawler game. So sadly, no live-action characters, which is a real bummer, especially since my most wanted character is Ed from Good Burger. Oh well. Maybe they should have called this Nicktoons All-Star Brawl and not Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. We were told before that they asked for Alex Mack, but maybe that was when getting live-action reps was shot down by Nick. I don't know. I wish we were told a little sooner, though, that there's no live-action characters. Maybe the developers didn't want to reveal that until after they revealed April, since many, myself included, were thinking that live-action Dora might have been that silhouette, and they didn't want to reveal live-action characters were not in the game, keeping April a bit more of a mystery. While I really wanted some live-action characters, I can totally live with this game being just Nicktoons, of course. Plenty of cool stuff to pull from there, and maybe in some future sequel, a live-action rep can be like the moment when we first got third-party characters added to Smash revealed. I wonder if Stick Stickly and other puppet-like characters count as live-action, or is that animation? He's also among my most wanted. Okay, so with live-action characters totally out, us getting April instead of live-action Dora, is that the end of the road for Dora? Well, one odd thing was noticed on the IGN description of the game. Under franchises, it says both Nickelodeon and Nick Jr., so maybe there is something else from Nick Jr. in this game. A Blue's Clues character, maybe? That would be my choice. I know I was speculating about how maybe Nick might not approve of Nick Jr. stuff in a fighting game, but I'd honestly love to see Blue as a fighter, and that was just speculation. Unsure how official the IGN description of the franchises is here, though, so I wouldn't take this as absolute confirmation Nick Jr. stuff is in the game. But it might be. Something a bit more official is the ESRB rating for the game. The rating summary says, "This is a platform fighter game in which players compete in brawls with characters from a variety of Nickelodeon shows. SpongeBob SquarePants, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Players use punches, kicks, and special attacks. Pizza throw, log toss. To knock opponents off platform levels. Combat is often frenetic, accompanied by impact sounds, colorful light bursts, and screen-shaking effects. A handful of characters can perform comical attack moves. Toot laser, first fart, against opponents." So here we have a few specific attacks being described and named. Most notable are log toss and first fart. Log toss I first assumed meant log from Ren and Stimpy, but maybe it could actually be an Angry Beaver's attack. First fart is definitely a Ren and Stimpy attack, though. Something else one of the devs shared about character specifics was, "If there's one dev bias I'll gladly wear on my sleeve, it's making damn sure that there's no floaty characters in this game." Danny and Redacted are the only 2 characters that are anywhere close to floaty, but are still what most Smash games would consider middle of the road in fall speed. So they instead have better aerial speed and controls respectively. So that's good news for competitive level players. Not positive who Redacted might be, who'd be floaty like Danny, but if I had to guess, I assume it's probably Aang. With his airbending, small frame, and likely flying around playstyle, I could see Aang being a bit floaty, much like Danny. Alright, so now let's talk where home stage theory is at, because it's shaping up to be a very strong theory at this point. Home stage theory is basically that every fighter has their own home stage. So the number of stages and the number of fighters will be the same, and the stages we have will line up with the characters. April O'Neil fits as our 3rd Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles rep, giving each of the known TMNT stages a respective rep. Reptar remains the last known fighter to not have a clear home stage attached to him, though I assume his Rugrats stage will probably involve the babies in some way, and maybe they don't want to deconfirm them as background elements yet. We also have a Legend of Korra stage and 2 Avatar stages now. With Aang and Korra on the box art, that would leave one more potential home stage for another Avatar character. Given that the Western Air Temple fits Aang extremely well as a home stage, that leaves Omashu as the lone known stage without a clear fighter attached to it. The 2 characters I've seen people speculating the most are either Zuko or Toph. While I think either character could be really cool and both have very strong moveset potentials, I'm personally leaning towards it being Toph. While Omashu isn't particularly Toph related, it is an Earth Kingdom stage, and I figure Zuko would have like the Fire Nation fleet as his stage or something. Also, Toph I think has the slightly more unique moveset potential over Zuko. Throwing rocks, creating rock armor, sending waves of rocks across a stage platform, all sounds really cool to me. Zuko, of course, still has a very cool moveset potential, using fire attacks and possibly using like a sword or something, but I still think Toph wins out here. Toph also has trouble fighting in the air, so she could be this game's equivalent to like Little Mac. Hopefully with just somewhat weak aerials and not a dismal recovery and all the other bad stuff attached to Mac though. Maybe her specials can't be used in the air, but she can still punch and kick just fine or something. I think there's some interesting fighter potential there. Alright, so with all that said, let's take a stab at predicting the rest of this roster. With CatDog and April confirmed, that leaves 6 more unknown fighters to get us to 22. We have the box art silhouette leak, so let's add the known box art fighters in. Aang, Korra, and Ren and Stimpy. 3 spots left if I double up Ren and Stimpy. And if the home stage theory is correct, we will get at least one more Avatar character. My guess is Toph, so I'm going to add her in. It could, of course, be some other Avatar rep though, but I'm going to use Toph as the stand-in for that. Alright, down to 2 spots left, and this is where it gets a lot more tricky. Looking at the roster for Nickelodeon Kart Racers Grand Prix 2, the only Nicktoon series we don't have yet in All-Star Brawl is Rocko's Modern Life. Also considering much like Hey Arnold and Invader Zim, Rocko recently got a revival in the form of a new movie, Static Cling. I think a Rocko character is very likely to show up in this game. I'm also a really big fan of Rocko. Out of the not yet confirmed Nicktoons for this game, Rocko's Modern Life is probably my favorite. So I'll admit some bias here, but I do truly think a Rocko rep is likely. Now I don't know if that rep would be Rocko or not. Rocko has the potential for an awesome moveset. He could use Spunky, his Wallaby jumps and kicks could be cool, and his jackhammering could be in there too. It's possible they pass over him though for a different character. Heifer was in the Kart Racer, and we don't really have a big, huge character yet, beyond like Reptar or Powdered Toast Man, who don't seem to truly be big characters. I'm going to go with Rocko himself here, but any Rocko rep would make me happy. Heifer as our big character, or even someone like Mr. Big Head or Filbert, I'd be cool with anyone if they pick a Rocko rep. Now, if Ren and Stimpy aren't single, duo, ice climbers like fighters, but rather 2 separate characters, that right there might finish off the roster. But for speculation's sake, let's say Ren and Stimpy only take up a single spot and keep going here. So what other Nicktoons could fill that final spot? Let's look at some of the more popular and memorable Nicktoon shows. Doug was among the first 3 Nicktoons ever, premiering alongside Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy. And this game certainly seems to pander to 90s Nick nostalgia, so that's likely the era where another Nicktoon would come from. However, Doug passed ownership over to Disney, and while I think Nick still has the rights to like the original run of the series, the episodes that ran on Nickelodeon, I'm unsure how tough licensing the characters themselves from Doug to new products is for Nick these days. Because of all that, I'm pretty doubtful of Doug. He's kind of like Banjo-Kazooie, now owned by another company, and we'll be very lucky if we ever see him return home to Nick one day. Alright, so moving on. Fairly OddParents and Jimmy Neutron seem to dominate Nickelodeon alongside SpongeBob back in the 2000s. But even with Nick's recent surge in pushing Nickelodeon nostalgia, for whatever reason, as of late, Nick seems to ignore these 2 franchises, despite their massive popularity during their heyday. Also on Discord, Clorbo wrote, "If Jimmy or Timmy were in, they 100% would have been on the box art." Which is a really good point. Both shows were so huge, I can't see them being in the game and not being featured on the cover of the box. Also, Fairly OddParents is one of those shows made by Frederator Studios. For some reason, no Frederator shows were in the Nickelodeon kart racing game. And we don't have any Frederator shows announced for All-Star Brawl yet. Unsure what the issue is there, maybe it's slightly tougher to license Frederator stuff, but whatever the case is, those shows might be out, at least for now. If this is the case, that could also mean no Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot. Well, continuing down the list of Nicktoons and looking at what's left for 90s nostalgia pandering, the next 2 shows that come to mind for me would be Rocket Power and Angry Beavers. Both have very unique moveset potential for fighters. Skateboarding, rollerblading, surfing, and other extreme sports stuff could be great, and all the wackiness from Angry Beavers could also make for some really fun fighters. I give the edge slightly to Angry Beavers here. Being a slightly older show, I think it's seen as more at home than Rocket Power is, alongside the other 90s nostalgia Nicktoons this game seems to prefer. We also have that log toss attack in the ESRB description, which although I think will be for Ren and Stimpy using log, it might be for Angry Beavers. You could do one of the beavers instead of a duo, but I decided to have both of them here. It's just hard for me to pick between Daggett and Norbert, but I'd probably give it to Daggett if there could only be one beaver here. But the final character might not be a classic Nicktoon at all. Garfield was recently acquired by Nickelodeon, and the Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl Discord seems obsessed with Garfield. We of course have the Garfield leak I talked about at the start of this video, but whether that one's real or fake, Garfield still seems like he probably has a really good shot of getting into this game. Honestly, I'd even give Garfield the edge over Angry Beavers or some other Nicktoon show taking that final spot. In a Ren and Stimpy are separate characters scenario, I think I might even give the edge to Garfield over getting Rocco. Just feels like the developers are really into Garfield for some reason. And it kind of feels like this game will have at least one more very unexpected out there choice. And despite all the speculation surrounding Garfield, Garfield is objectively an unexpected out there choice for a Nickelodeon fighting game. There are other candidates for a final surprise character, of course. Stick Stickly would probably be my choice, but it's a really out there rep and I don't know if he counts as live action anyway. We also have that whole IGN description listing the franchises as both Nickelodeon and Nick Jr. So maybe a Nick Jr. rep will take the final spot and be a unexpected character. Blue from Blue's Clues getting in would be amazing. The Thinking Chair would also make a really great stage. But still, I think I'd give the edge to Garfield over any of the Nick Jr. reps. That IGN description might not be super official, so I'm wary of banking on Nick Jr. content. So maybe this will be the final 22 roster character that we get. Well, one other thing that I think is worth looking at is something I noticed in regard to home stage theory. The 3 SpongeBob stages we got are a little odd. Jellyfish Fields, Glove World, and the Flying Dutchman's ship. They're great stage choices, but we don't have either of the most iconic SpongeBob locations. The Krusty Krab, or SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick's houses. Obviously, we don't have to have the Krusty Krab or SpongeBob's neighborhood, but they seem like obvious choices to represent the series. So maybe we will have one more SpongeBob fighter yet to be revealed, and they will bring one of these iconic locations with them. If any series could justify having 4 reps, it would probably be SpongeBob. The frontrunners, in my opinion, are Mr. Krabs or Squidward. Sorry, Plankton Bros. I give a slight edge to Squidward over Mr. Krabs here, as arguably after SpongeBob and Patrick, I think he's the 3rd main character of the show. So maybe instead of Garfield, we simply get one more SpongeBob rep. Or potentially we could keep Garfield and get rid of Rocco for a 4th SpongeBob rep. And maybe the least exciting outcome could be that there's no more new series at all. Ren and Stimpy are separate fighters, and instead of any new series, we just get a 4th SpongeBob rep. Don't get me wrong saying that's the least exciting outcome. I love SpongeBob, and both Squidward and Mr. Krabs have amazing moveset potential, and I could see either of them honestly becoming another potential main for me alongside Zim. But I'd certainly rather see as much diversity with what series get represented in this game's roster over just getting more SpongeBob stuff. So I'd say this is probably my best guess currently at the 22 characters we could get. But I've shown you guys a lot of other realistic potential outcomes as well. I was honestly hopeful for a larger roster than 22, but I think if this was the roster we got, it would be a pretty solid foundation to start off on, especially if there was DLC added or a sequel, and this game did become a continuing series. Game Mill did say they were making plans, and that might have simply meant they were planning out the character reveals and stuff before the game launches, but potentially it could mean negotiating with Nickelodeon for the green light to do DLC. The game has clearly gotten an enormous fan reaction, likely much more than Nickelodeon expected it would. The announcement trailer has over 2 million views, which rivals and even exceeds most other fighting games that get continued DLC support. So I think if the developer asks for it, Nick would likely agree to bump up the game's budget and continue it for a while with some DLC characters, and especially if the game sells really well at launch. So if you're hopeful for some DLC, I suggest buying the base game if they don't announce it beforehand. Anyway, all that said, let's keep going and predict what some DLC characters might look like. I'm going to do a best case scenario DLC roster, so I'm going to add 8 more spots for the DLC. 8 is the number of mystery characters they left after the initial reveal trailer. It's what they presented to us in that 22 character lineup image. And if this was done in 2 DLC packs of 4 characters with 4 stages each, I think this falls within the reasonable expectation level range. That would be a 30 character roster in the end, which is big, but not unreasonably big in a DLC scenario. I'm going to try to be realistic with this, but again, this is my best case scenario DLC roster, so I am pushing the limit a bit, so I'm going with 30 characters. Also, do keep in mind, even if we did get DLC, we could get much less DLC than this. Maybe something like just 3 or 4 more additional characters added. And of course, no DLC at all is completely possible too. I'm definitely jumping the gun speculating DLC fighters at all, but this is just for fun anyway, so whatever. Keep your hype and expectations in check, everybody. Alright, so starting off, I think it's best to get more new series into the game. We have that whole theory about Frederator Studio shows not being a part of this game. They weren't in the kart racer, and so far we haven't seen any Frederator stuff show up in All-Star Brawl. XJ9 from My Life as a Teenage Robot is winning the fan polls, and we know the devs are aware of the fan polls. And when it comes to DLC, that would be characters designed after the game's release, fan demand could be taken into account for those. And Frederator Studio shows not being a part of the game is just a theory. It's just a strange thing people have noticed. It doesn't seem to be a part of this game, and it wasn't a part of the kart racer game. But Frederator Studio shows have been in other games, so it's definitely not totally off the table. I feel like it's something they could get, but it might be a little bit more difficult. But for DLC, if there's fan demand, they might go out of their way to do so. Jenny does have this badminton theory going for her, although it's been pointed out that badminton does appear on the Loud House, so maybe that's all it was for, and the badminton theory was pretty flimsy anyway. So while she'd be a cool character, I don't know if Jenny will actually make base game. However, as a DLC fighter, I think she has a fantastic shot, so I'm going to add Jenny as the first DLC fighter here. And that said, if we got Jenny, then the doors would be open to Frederator Studio series. And I think a Fairly OddParents rep would be insane to ignore. The series was right up there with SpongeBob as Nick's most popular and most played show for like a decade or more. Fairly OddParents does actually show up in some recent Nick games, but even still, for whatever reason, it tends to get ignored much more than it should be, especially with how hugely popular the series was. But if Frederator stuff is in after Jenny gets in, so if we can do Frederator stuff for DLC, then I think Timmy with Cosmo and Wanda is a no-brainer. The main character of a popular show with the potential for a unique moveset, Timmy is perfect for this game. Fairly OddParents is basically a must for a Nicktoon crossover game in my opinion, and it's shocking to think, for whatever reason, it might not have made base game. Now if we add Timmy Turner, I feel like next up is obviously Jimmy Neutron. These two were the faces of 2000s era Nick. With so much 90s Nicktoon nostalgia pandering in the base game, the DLC can be the perfect place to help bump up the roster with some mid-era Nick stuff, like My Life as a Teenage Robot, Fairly OddParents, and Jimmy Neutron. I'm totally a 90s Nick kid, and I love the 90s nostalgia, but objectively, we need these two series, Fairly OddParents and Jimmy Neutron, in this game. Now, while I think Timmy with Cosmo and Wanda having wishing powers is probably the best Fairly OddParents rep, I know Hugh Neutron has a huge fan following, and I like Hugh, but I'd still realistically probably go with Jimmy here for all the cool science moveset stuff he could bring to the table. But any Jimmy Neutron series rep would be fine with me. Alright, so that's a pretty solid 2000s mid-era Nick representation we got going on, adding this DLC. Next, I'm going to harken back to all the stuff I was talking about with Angry Beavers. I think after Rocco, that's likely the next Nicktoon that'd get attention out of all the old 90s Nicktoons that this game seems to favor. Now, there are plenty of other great Nicktoon series I'd love to see here, such as Doug, Kablam, and Rocket Power. And there's even some mid-era stuff, some newer stuff, Chalk Zone, El Tigre, etc., that could be really cool to get as well. But if I'm honest, I do think Angry Beavers would win out against all of those. Also, I'm a fan of the Angry Beavers, so I'd be happy to see them in. And again, maybe as a duo fighter, or maybe as a single beaver. Just Norb or just Dag. But putting them in here, I'm just going to show them as a duo. Okay, now while I do think putting new series into the game is a better move than more fighters from existing series, if I'm being realistic, I doubt the DLC would consist entirely of just adding new series. And there are a few shows on this roster that are such major franchises, they basically demand more reps once you get to a certain character count. In a perfect world, if I was just making a wish list roster, I'd probably add 4 more brand new shows next. However, this isn't a wish list, It's a best case scenario, and even with the best case scenario, I'm trying to be realistic about what I think could happen. This might end up being the first game featuring the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles where you can't play as all 4 of them. So I think Raphael and Donatello are extremely likely additions in the case of DLC. SpongeBob is Nickelodeon's most popular show, and basically Nick's mascot at this point, so I suspect another SpongeBob rep would have to happen with DLC as well. That is, if we don't get 4 in base game. If, say, Squidward got in over Rocco or something, then add Rocco to the DLC instead. Either way, I don't think we could get to this many fighters, a roster this size, without a 4th SpongeBob rep actually happening. So I'm adding in Squidward as part of my DLC. The one other series I think would likely also take another roster spot if we got up to this number of fighters is Avatar. So for the final DLC character spot, I'm adding in Zuko. With Aang, Korra, and Toph, Zuko completes having a character representing each of the 4 nations. Yes, 2 of them are avatars, but with Zuko added, we have each of the 4 avatar cultures wrapped with a different fighter, who could specialize in that type of bending for their moveset. Aang and Korra can use all the different types of bending, but I think they would specialize in airbending and waterbending respectively. So there you go, that's my best case scenario, but still semi-realistic 30 character final roster after DLC for Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. If we ended the game with this roster, or a roster looking like this, I'd be very, very satisfied. This would be a phenomenal start for a Nickelodeon-style Smash Bros. Game. Are there other things I'd have wanted to get? Definitely. My most wanted fighters aren't even on here. Are there other Nicktoon shows I think really deserve to get some representation? Definitely, but we can only fit so many. And are there other characters I think could make incredible playable characters from series we did get on this roster? Also definitely. I mean, not having any of the babies from Rugrats is strange to begin with for me, but I think this is realistic. And I really do think something like this roster would objectively be the best case scenario for a roster we could get at the end of everything, while still keeping some realistic parameters in mind. Real quick, I'm just going to run down the remaining new stages I'd choose for this roster. Reptar doesn't have a stage yet, and while I've seen people suggesting Reptar Land, I think without the babies playable, you need a more grounded, classic Rugrats stage to truly rep the series really well. So I'd do the Playpen, and have Spike and the babies playing around in the background, maybe Grandpa Lou asleep on his chair, just lots of classic Rugrats stuff in the background. While the fighters would be toy-sized, kind of like Powdered Toast Man's giant kitchen stage, playing around with like giant blocks and other toys. This would also somewhat give Reptar the appearance of a Reptar doll that's come to life. For Ren and Stimpy, it's very difficult to choose a stage, since the show didn't have much in the way of reoccurring locations. It's actually one of the reasons I'm thinking Ren and Stimpy must be a single duo fighter. It's just hard to come up with multiple stages here, and we already have Powdered Toast Man stage. I was thinking the Firehouse, but actually the spaceship from the Space Madness episode could be a really unique and cool stage, so I'd go with that. For Rocco, I think Conglamo or Choky Chicken might be cool, but the classic Rocco and Mr. Big Head houses I think are just too iconic for the series to pass up. Also, you could easily have like Spunky and the Big Heads and maybe Filbert or Heifer in the background. It could be pretty cool. Garfield would have to have John Arbuckle's house as a stage, probably like the kitchen table. Odie and John, of course, could be making appearances in the background as well. My Life as a Teenage Robot was a tough one to pick a stage, but I think if Rocket Power isn't here, then this would be a cool opportunity to do a skate park stage. And if Rocket Power got in for a sequel or something, you could do the beach, or honestly, you gotta do the Shore Shack. As for Timmy Turner, Fairy World seems like the most unique stage he could have. Kinda reminds me of Magicant from Smash. The Fairy World sign, a rainbow bridge, pink clouds, and lots of fairies and probably Jorgen in the background could make the stage really unique. I think for Jimmy Neutron, I'd do the top of the candy bar and have lots of other characters walking around outside, like Sheen and Carl and Cindy and stuff. Whether Hugh or Jimmy was the rep, I'd make this the stage. It's just very iconic to the show. For the Angry Beavers, I think their Beaver Dam is basically a no-brainer, though a black and white Oxnard Montalvo crawling spleen horror movie stage might be really cool too. Now, potentially in a DLC scenario, there might not even be stages, or just the fighters from new series could come with stages, or something like that. But to finish this whole thing off, I'll keep going. Next was probably the toughest to come up with stages for, having to add 2 more Ninja Turtle stages. It's one of the reasons why having home stages for every single character can actually tie your hands up a bit with what characters you can do. We already have the city rooftops, the sewers, and the Technodrome in what appears to be Dimension X, and that's basically your perfect Ninja Turtle stage lineup right there. But if I had to add 2 more stages to get Raph and Don in, I'd probably do like a bridge stage, something reminiscent of the first level of Turtles in Time, although I'd likely probably make it during the day to have a different aesthetic to the 3 very dark Ninja Turtle stages we have already. And finally, I'd do some kind of moving turtle vehicle for the other Turtle stage, as the vehicles were pretty classic for the 80s cartoon, and especially the toy lines. Maybe like on top of the Turtle van, or the Turtles blimp, or riding on a vehicle surfing through the sewers themselves or something. Any of those would be cool. Finally, for Zuko, I think a Fire Nation warship or fleet of warships would be a perfect stage for him. And very different from the Avatar stages we have so far. There could even be like a huge battle or something going on in the background. Alright, well that's all the stages I do for this roster. Video's getting kinda long, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. One quick note though, last time I mentioned how a lot of Nick characters have similar sounding names. You do a consonant, followed by a vowel, and then the ending is MMY or NNY. I pointed out specifically Timmy, Jimmy, Tommy, Jenny, and Danny, but I spaced on a few more. Donnie from the Wild Thornberrys, although he isn't the main character, has that same naming convention, and Manny is the name of the main character in El Tigre. It's crazy how often Nicktoon character names follow this pattern. Alright, well that's everything I wanted to talk about in this video. Do you think the Garfield leak is real? Or do you trust the devs are being honest and it's actually fake? Do you agree with my train of thought for predicting the rest of the 22 character base roster? And what do you guys think of the DLC roster I did, the 30 character one? Do you think that's cool, or would you have done something else? If you guys have any thoughts or comments about any of the stuff I talked about in this video, leave them below.
Remember to like the video, leave a comment in the section below, and subscribe to PapaGenos!
Twitter, Patreon, Discord.